Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Isa Bako podcast. Today we have a wonderful guest on the show. Would you go ahead and please introduce yourself, if you don't mind?
Sure. My name is Reggie, and I met Issa through TikTok.
Thank you, Reggie. What is it that you do that is the reason why you're on the show today, I guess?
Perfect. So I met Issa obviously through TikTok because Issa, you happened to do a video that caught my algorithm because I talk a lot about Mormonism. And I am a seventh and eighth gen Mormon. I was brought up in the LDS Church of Latter day Saint religion, and I'm a seventh and eighth gen descendant of the original founding. But I talk a lot about ex Mormon stuff, and you had a video regarding the connection to federal government and Mormons, and I happened to comment on it. And I've been sending you videos ever since, so I apologize.
Absolutely. So basically, that was the whole reason I invited you on this podcast today was to talk about Mormonism in the government and its connection. I guess to start off, if can you please explain to anyone listening what Mormonism is, and so
Sure.
people.
Yeah. So it's a evangelical religion that is American made. And it started in 1830 when Joseph Smith published what he called the Book of Mormon, which he claimed was a divine translation of a set of golden plates that he had discovered years before that had an account of an ancient um, warrior named Captain Moroni, who was buried these plates, excuse me. And it told the story of a gentleman named Lehi and his sons Nephi and all of their children who basically leave from the Middle East and they somehow come over to North America. But basically, the Book of Mormon, what it turns out to be, is a testament that Christ, after his crucifixion, was resurrected and came to the Americas. So that's where kind of the Mormon theology surrounds. There's a lot more to it, but it is an evangelical Christian religion on the surface.
Thank you very much for that. This the gentleman who what's his name, if you don't mind me asking again, the gentleman who buried the tablets.
So that would have been Captain Moroni, yes.
Where does he come from?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd have to get into my theology a little bit more, but there's a few different stories, but originally Joseph Smith and others felt that Moroni and all of them were descendants of the first indigenous nations on Turtle Island or North America. So descendants of indigenous people. Um, but Joseph Smith, in the area where he did live in Palmyra, New York, it was not uncommon for there to be burial mounds of the actual indigenous people that lived there, but no connection to anyone named Moroni. And in fact, the names, some of them are taken from other texts, like the Spalding transcript, which a lot of Mormons don't know, but it was written 20 or so years before Smith wrote the Book of Mormon, and it's got almost paragraph to paragraph copy and pastes in it. So they're not indigenous necessarily words, they were just plagiarized. I mean, they could be indigenous, but yeah.
Okay, as far as sects go, because I believe Mormonism is a sect of Christianity. What is the core belief of Mormonism, and what separates them from, say, Catholicism and Lutherans? Like, what separates Mormons from the rest?
That's an interesting question. And if you were to ask an active Mormon, they would have probably all the ways they differentiate. I will say they do not, it doesn't differentiate because it is a stealing and appropriation of a lot of different religions, including evangelical ones. Smith took from Judaism, he took from even the occult, he took from Islam, he took from a lot of different beliefs, especially the Abrahamic religions, and kind of adopted and put them all into one. So it's kind of a mix of a lot of different things, even Kabbalah. So where Mormons will tell you they differ is that they believe that families can be together forever, that there was an eternal plan of salvation, and Mormons, when we were in the pre-existence, chose who to come down to, who would be our parents, and what kind of life we'd have. But also in that pre-existence doctrine that
I
was
believe
familiar.
that aspect was taken from Islam, because I believe in Islam, I am Muslim, and in
Okay,
Islam, it is believed that a child, in before you come to earth, gets to pick what parents you would eventually be born to. But when you're born, you forget all of that, and I do believe that. But don't quote me. But I do believe that is from Islam.
very interesting, and that's why I say, like, Mormons will tell you it's unique, and then we come to find out it's another thing stolen. It's very similar. I have a friend, a good friend, who is Jewish, and one day I just said, hey, look at these symbols, what do you see? And he happened to say, hey, that's Hebrew. That's Hebrew, that's Hebrew. And these are things that Joseph Smith claimed to have gotten under divine revelation, which is crazy because apparently he's Moses too, if he can receive all of this divine revelation. So it's interesting that way.
There are some theories and rumors going around that the religion was created to justify slavery in America. Do you think that is true, or do you think it was just more like Scientology, or do you think it had an ulterior motive?
I don't know if it had an ulterior motive, but it did further white supremacy and slavery. So, regardless of the intent, the effect is it has furthered colonization, not just in the United States, but globally. I do not think it was created for slavery. At a point in time, even the United States considered the twin evils of the United States to be slavery and polygamy at the same time. And there are some prophets of the LDS Church origins, including Smith, who originally did give priesthood to Black individuals. And then when Brigham Young took over, who was a Zionist and a racist, he denied that, and so did Taylor and the subsequent prophets up until 1978, when they got rid of the Black priesthood ban. But of course, that's because the law was about to crack down on BYU. So that's why.
So you're saying there are Zionists who are there are Mormons who are Zionists?
Yes, actually, I would say the entire religion, as far as the mainstream Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints, is a Zionist religion. And I would say you probably have individuals who are within the org that are not Zionists, but I would say they are raised to be Zionists. Yes.
All right. Another question I have is, like, so we know, like, we have the what's it called, the Mennonites and the Amish.
Mhm.
Is there a similar thing with Mormonism? Are there like hardcore Mormons, and then like the lesser? Is there are there tiers to Mormonism?
Yes, there are. So when Mormonism was founded in the 1830s, from the founding, they just kind of had issues because Joseph Smith was a known snake oil salesman, farm boy, and he married this preacher's wife or daughter, excuse me, without permission, and that's Emma Smith. And so when they were in New York, they had a few families that were close to them, but not very much. So they had to leave and go to Ohio, Illinois, Missouri. And they're being basically chased out of these different places. And as they go, different doctrines start to come up. But the big one that shook everyone was the doctrine of polygamy, which Joseph Smith started practicing in secret before he ever revealed it as a revelation from God. And in doing so in secret, what he was really doing was child molestation, because some of his first victims were relatives of Emma Hale who were living in the Smith household to help with their children. And they were, 12, 13, 14-year-old girls. Some people will say it was an affair. I call that uh, child molestation. There's no consent there. And so what started as what they call a filthy, dirty affair was actually Joseph Smith with a bunch of other women, and created this doctrine called polygamy, which he received from God, and it's the eternal covenant. And it is the only way to reach the highest tier of Mormon heaven is to participate in polygamy. But once that hit, all of a sudden, all of these sects started jumping off. So you had some that just did not want to practice polygamy. You had some that thought Joseph had just lost his mind and been swayed by evil people. Um, and then from the time that Young was shot, or excuse me, Smith was shot and Young took over, you have more. So there are actually, I think, several hundred breakoff
I'm sorry,
groups.
you said Smith was shot?
Yes, he was shot and killed, in fact.
Oh, so can you? I've never heard that. Oh, we
Oh,
know of his
yes.
existence. I never really thought about his life or his death. We just know of him and his creations. Would you care to share more about that?
Sure. Actually, I can explain the Smith story almost in because a current event that has just dropped recently is the Diddy situation. In Hollywood regarding these blackmail rings, and actually the same thing can be said of the Mormon Church. And if you look at it, so you have Tupac, Biggie, Puffy. Um, Basically, Joseph Smith would have been either Tupac or Biggie, and Puffy is Brigham Young. He arranged for he'd had it with Smith. He'd arranged, and a lot of people had it with Smith too, but he'd arranged things once Smith was killed to be the one to take over. But yeah, Smith and his brother were actually arrested and held in Carthage jail because they were arrested after they developed alternative articles to the Constitution of the United States. In 1844, Joseph Smith began his first bid and only bid to the President of the United States. So actually, he would be our first presidential candidate that was actually assassinated, technically. So yeah, he and his brother Hiram, but a mob of townspeople allegedly came and shot him and his brother in the jail. However, in the jail also were two other individuals of the Mormon church. One of them is my relative, and they have conflicting accounts as to the nature of the mob, how the mob came, and there are so many stories about how Joseph Smith died that no one, I believe, has ever gotten the truth.
That is interesting. I never knew. Like, for some reason, I just thought he lived a peaceful, long life and died.
He didn't. And what started the even before the treason, because he'd been having these affairs, and not just with the underage girls, but with women, some of them already married to other Mormon men, who he had coerced and told, if you don't become my eternal wife, your family is going to go to hell. And he would withhold blessings from people. And so he'd send men on missions abroad to England and then marry their wives while they were gone. And the men would come back and he'd go, no, she's mine now.
You said
um,
something about the highest heaven and polygamy. So, in
yeah.
basically, you're saying in Mormonism, any man who marries just one wife has forfeited the highest levels of heaven, no matter how good of a person they are.
In when polygamy was the law of the land, yes. Now it's still technically in the scriptures that it is the everlasting covenant. However, they had to disavow that after the federal government again came cracking down and made the Mormon church get rid of polygamy.
So, it's technically not legal, but in Utah, basically, we have shows of Mormons with multiple wives. So, how
Right.
do they get away with it? Even how do they get away with living publicly, displaying an illegal lifestyle publicly? How do they constantly get away with that?
Right. So they are part of the individuals that people will see on TV, like Sister Wives, for instance, where they have, a man and then multiple adult wives. They are actually one of the breakoffs of the original mainstream Mormonism because um, there was a point when the Mormons had to give up the polygamy after the Moral Act, and some Mormons didn't want to give that up. So there were also breakoffs after the refusal to give up polygamy. And we end up with, for instance, the people in the Warren Jeffs clans and such. Now, although the Mormon church is very aware, or the heads of the Mormon church in Salt Lake are very aware of these individuals, they're technically not part of their main religion. They're in a breakoff group with their own organization and probably profit, etc.
So as far as the main headquarters in Utah, there's no polygamy
No, that's
officially.
not quite. I That's right technically, but well, that's right on the surface, but technically even mainstream Mormons still practice polygamy because of an ordinance we have, uh, which is work for the dead. For instance, the current prophet, who is President Nelson, he's already a polygamist because when his first wife was alive, he was sealed to her, which is being married in the temple. She passed away, and then he remarried another woman and is sealed to her. So technically, he's got two wives already in heaven, according to our theology or Mormon theology.
All right, thank you for that. So, talking about Mormonism in government, what exactly is it about Mormons that makes them so attractive to government agencies?
I think there's a few things. Definitely the lifestyle standards that are mandated by the Mormon church would be a big one. Um, there is a doctrine called the Word of Wisdom by the Mormons that was forced strict adherence around like the 1930s, I believe. And that's where you'll see Mormons don't smoke, drink. They have certain grooming standards. They all very much look alike, but it's a lot of foods in moderation. But it was basically a way for saints to live. And again, that's like no coffee, no liquor, no weed, no tobacco, and no sex before marriage. It has all of these guidelines for an individual to live their life, which are not necessarily bad things, but Mormons are required to keep those because it's a commandment to them. And it's also for very Orthodox Mormons, it is a requirement to be able to go into the LDS temples that you keep all of the requirements of the Word of Wisdom. So you have to answer to a bishop to keep that recommend up. So, a federal agency, given their strict background checks, first off, they've got a population of people who will probably easily pass those for the most part. And also, Mormons are very obedient individuals. So I think the federal government also likes that because Mormons from the time we're born were kind of raised to bow to authority. It's an authoritarian religion. So we're very used to authority giving us orders and not asking twice. So I would say that's a twofold answer of why the federal government is interested in Mormons.
Would you think? Okay, so I guess my question is: part Mormonism, is spirituality an important part of your daily life? In that, like, do they actually import spirituality into everything they do? Work life balance, is that something that's encouraged in Mormonism?
Yes, I would say it's a false sense of spirituality though, because what it really is Mormonism requires you as an individual to look at everything, every action, every word, everything through the lenses of the church. So you're not oftentimes, even if an authority figure, for instance, is telling you to do something, if they're in authority, you do it and don't ask twice because they're in authority. This is that vertical morality or up down morality, where morality is hierarchical. And that's how Mormons are raised. And so in work
Wait,
life,
sorry
in
about that.
home life,
Morality is hierarchical, meaning the higher someone is, the more moral they are.
not only that, but wealth is also seen as a marker of God's love for people too in Mormon culture.
So
Yes.
the richer you are, the more favored you are by God. The poorer you are, the less favored you are by God.
Yes. And it may not be as frank as that, but there's a Mormons are taught that certain people are born in certain places because that's what they chose. So they're deserving of their position. I don't agree with
Like
that.
Africans.
Yes, for instance. I don't agree with that theology, but it's another reason a lot of Mormons will ignore things like Israel, like the Congo, like Sudan, like Haiti, because I believe a lot of Mormons growing up in a white supremacist religion do look at people of color as having less value than them. Yes.
Where do you think this mentality comes from? Of people of color having lesser value? Do you think because we've heard of Mark of the Cain, the Mark of Cain? Do you think it has anything to do with that?
Absolutely. It has to do with the very founding and the doctrine that still exists in the Book of Mormon and Doctrine of Covenants.
Can you
Uh,
please explain the doctrine for us,
yes.
especially Mark of Cain? That's very
Yep.
interesting.
Just one second, if you can. Just want to make sure I'm getting my references right.
No problem. Wow, this is very interesting, especially considering the fact that Mormons are opening up a lot of churches in Africa. So for me, it's kind of confusing. Like, I would assume that's a place you would want to stay away from, considering your doctrine. But again,
Well, and
I'm
the
just
Mormons also in the Sandwich Islands, they did a similar thing, it sounds like, to what they're doing in Africa. So, and that's why I was saying I think it might just be the same thing. Okay, so let me get this. Okay, so the Okay, so the curse of Cain is a doctrine where Brigham Young had stated that the descendants of Cain, who killed Abel in the Bible, were black because their skin was marked with a blackness for the sin of murder of their brother. And so, for a long time in Mormon theology and lessons, it was taught that black people were descendant from the mark of Cain. Now, there's a separate side to that as well, that another teaching stated that people were black or people of color were people of color because in the pre existence there was a war in heaven. And Jesus gave his plan to God the Father, and then Satan, Jesus's brother, gave his plan to God the Father, which was, I will force them to do what's right, where Jesus said, I will give them agency and the choice to do what's right. And so God the Father went with Jesus's plan, and Satan was not happy. And so he and the rest of his supporters were cast out, and there is some theology and some teachings that say the angels that went with Satan were cursed, and the color of their skin would be cursed, or those that agreed with Satan in the pre-existence. So
so
there's a
us
few
black
places
people
for that.
basically from pre-angelic times, we basically aligned with the devil.
That's correct,
Damn.
and not just and indigenous. The Book of Mormon, there are Nephites and Lamanites. And for a very long time, the LDS Church has tried to make them seem, like I said, like indigenous people, Polynesian people, but people who have legitimate ancient histories that have nothing to do with a white, you know, 19th century religion created by a guy in Palmyra.
So, if that religion was created in the United States at the time it was, they clearly had to have. So we know what they think about black people, especially. I'm assuming that mentality would have come, especially because it was during slavery. So they had seen slaves everywhere, and they had formed an opinion on black people. So, what is the Mormon view on non-black people of color, like the Hispanic people, Asian people, and the rest of anyone who's not white but not black? What's the Mormon Church's view on them?
What's interesting is I don't know that it has taken an official stance on any other races or ethnic groups other than, I will say, indigenous people and black people. So yeah, but technically the doctrine does say that everyone will be white and delisome in the celestial kingdom. So if that's the problem with Mormon theology. If you believe that literally, which I do have friends who are people of color that are former Mormons, they have told me and they have shared stories that say they really believed that their skin would become white in the afterlife, like as a mark of worthiness. And,
So wait, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're telling me that black Mormons believe that when they die, they will turn white.
yes, yeah. And
This is
imagine
mind boggling.
it is. And it's especially got to be very hard for adoptees who are people of color, kids of color, who for a very long time, up until 2014, there was like LDS Family Services, where they were an adoption service that members could use. And during the late 90s and early 2000s, there were a lot of white Mormon families who adopted kids from Haiti, from China, from Singapore, um, Africa, a lot of places. And they adopt these children internationally and bring them up in a religion, teaching them that their skin is a curse and that they will be white like their parents once they die, as long as they stay faithful. And I can't even imagine what that's like to internalize, but it's a problem.
It definitely is. I mean, because recently findings came out that there are Amish and Mennonite families that adopt black children here in the United States simply to as farmhands. Like they adopt black kids and just throw them on farms. Um, is there any negative, besides the spiritual aspect to it? Is there any negative physical connotation to being adopted by a Mormon family that you know of?
There could be. I do know of it was called the Indian Placement Program or the Lamanite Placement Program, which was essentially the Mormons helping the Utah and U.S. government with the boarding school process. And there were white families that took in indigenous kids and did have them work, not like their other white children, didn't treat them as good as their white children, including labor, including disrespectful practices like cutting indigenous kids' hair, which for those that may not know, hair is very sacred to indigenous people and is only to be cut upon certain events that are spiritual in nature. And you had these white families getting these indigenous kids from the reservations, chopping their hair to conform to white standards, shoving them in white school, and then on Sundays teaching them that everything they know about their indigenous life is wrong, that they were witchcraft practicers, and that everything they were doing on the reservation with their indigenous culture was wrong. And so they've already had a history of doing it. So I would not be surprised if that was the result of many kids who are adopted into these families.
Well, now that you said the belief of Black Mormons when they die, it makes a lot of sense when it comes to what's the word I'm looking for? Um, damn it! When they send people out to Africa, to Asia,
Missions.
to missions. Now,
Hmm.
missionary makes a lot of sense. It's they genuinely believe that they are there to save these Black people and turn them white in the afterlife. So yeah,
And
that
and
totally makes
Mormons
sense now.
And Mormons will deny it when they hear that, to their face. They'll go, "We don't believe that." But when you show them the scripture, it's exactly what it says. And the problem is so many Mormons are the way they're taught to research is by subject. And so they don't read it cover to cover, the Book of Mormon. They'll do it by like the subject faith. And then they will research the scriptures the church gives them down the line of this is what we look for in faith. So they'll say, "I've read the scriptures," but no, they've read the little master clippings of scriptures the church wants them to read. And I can tell you, the church never asks its members to read the stuff about the mark of Cain or polygamy or when Joseph started, things like the Danites and Nauvoo Legion and all of Smith's corruptions.
So
Uh,
what are those? The Danites and Nabu Legion?
yeah, so Danites, Danites, that kind of maybe goes into government as well. The Danites were an organization that were created right around the time of Joseph Smith's arrests and execution. But it was a secret organization, and it's spelled Danites, Danites. Sometimes they've been called the Daughters of Zion. It's all men, all men. But they were basically a secret group that would go around and spy and also create problems for people that were dissenting against the church, maybe members who were ex-members who were saying things against the church, but basically it was a mob circle. And they would even
So
kidnap.
basically the CIA before the CIA.
Exactly. And so that's why I think it's so interesting to know that there were in Israel, excuse me, before the IOF, there were certain uh, groups that were Zionist Jews that ended up becoming the IOF because, oh my God, if you look at the Danites and their history, I'm kind of curious if that's how the CIA became, is through the secret order of the Danites through the
Yeah,
Mormons.
so there are a lot of conspiracies, especially among Black people who know the history of Mormonism. Is the belief that one of the main reasons that Mormons are infiltrate. They use the word infiltrate because they believe it wasn't something the U.S. government actively set out to do. Is the Mormons got into government and they made sure that they actively hired just themselves, and so there's this belief that the CIA has a very vast Mormon population, and the belief of, like you said, when they choose where to be born, mark of Cain, the black skin is a curse. So all of these put together, it's like there are theories out there saying that CIA is working to stop all the things they do in Africa to stop Africans and Black people growing because it's a spiritual war for them. Like a lot of these people, the FBI stopping the Black Panther, it had nothing to do with stop with safety or whatever we thought it was. It had to do with spirituality. Like, look, we are defenders of Mormonism. We are defenders of white Jesus, and
Mhm.
these Black people who are supposed to be cursed are trying to get out of that curse, and we need to stop them.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are there any truths to that?
It is the impact, but or the effect. I don't know that it's necessarily the intent that Mormons see, though. And I think that's because they're so indoctrinated. Um, while they, on one hand, do see the place of individuals as their own earning or deserving, Mormons would also say that they don't feel like this crusade to go and cause disruption, they think they're actually helping everyone in Africa. They think these people are like the indigenous, so helpless. They need the white man to come in and help them. I really think
Oh,
that
so
these
they don't
young,
believe they're doing something malicious. They
right?
believe,
Yes,
ah,
yes,
that
yes.
makes it a lot worse.
It does.
I'm
It
sorry.
does. It does. And that's the indoctrination part because, like I said, they don't know these core doctrines. Now, the higher ups of the LDS Church in Salt Lake, those old men, the 70 and the 12, they know that doctrine. But these little young 19, 20-year olds really are going out there for service and what they think is to bring people closer to Jesus Christ. But really, what they are just useful tools for the corporation of the church to infiltrate and get into other territories and governments. And if you know anything about the corporate part of the church, they are Caterpillar, Raytheon, all of these big corporations that
No, I don't know
control.
much about the corporation. I just know
Mhm.
that the Mormon church right now is the most powerful and the wealthiest. Like they are wealthier than the Vatican. When I found that out, because I went long for a vast long period of my life. I just, the Vatican, they've had thousands of years of dominance to acquire as much wealth as they desired. And then the Mormon church, within a very short span, has beat them. And I'm like, how did they manage that? So, how
Yeah.
did they become the wealthiest religious institution in the world?
Oh, that's a fun question, Isa. Well, a lot of different ways, but the number one way is right. So in America, we've got the 501c3s, including churches, which are tax exempt. And it's not just the Mormons. Really, you saw a huge spike in churches after Scientology in the early 90s. The IRS decided to not come down on Scientology. All of a sudden, religions, charities went crazy because they realized they could now invest, likely tax free, as long as their arms of the charity were somehow connected to the charity. And that is how the Mormon church has amassed almost $1 trillion. It also took member tithing. Members of the Mormon faith, the mainstream Mormon faith, to be in good standing, you have to give 10% of your income per month to the church. So, what the church was doing, as people found out later because of
I'm sorry.
whistleblowing.
So we have regular tithings that is demanded of everyone in Christianity,
Mhm.
that is in demanded of everyone in Islam, demanded of everyone in Judaism, and then the
Mhm.
Mormon Church have their own separate extra 10%. Or are you
Uh,
saying it's that tithing that they made it a monthly thing?
they made it a monthly thing and it only goes to the Mormon church. But what the Mormon church does is it makes it easy, again, top down, it makes it easy to check off the charity. They say, give us 10% of your income per month. That money that you're giving us is going towards charity. It's going to help the needy in Africa. It's going to help stop trafficking. It's going to help solve, crisis after hurricanes. That's what we all thought our money was going towards. Come to find out, it was going towards business, stocks, a shopping mall called City Creek built downtown Salt Lake. And so, yeah, when you get member tithing tax free, invest it, get returns, you'll make a lot of money really fast. And that's how they've done it.
I mean, that is, I mean,
And we
can't
didn't
knock the
know.
hustle.
I didn't know. Like, and if you think about it this way, generations, so 7 and 8 generations of my family members have been paying 10% per month. Think of how many generations of family members for 7 and 8 generations that did that. And that is how it's a pyramid. It's off the backs of the members, is how it
So
got
your
rich.
bloodline, I'm sorry to say, has given at least 10 million to this church. At
If not
least.
more. If not more.
That is, wow. That
Yeah.
is, whew. That's, wow. Okay. Well, so
And
are there
freely
any more
boosted.
things you want to share? Because there's so much right now I'm learning. I'm just like
Sure.
all over the place. It's mind boggling.
No problem.
So the thing is, how is it that finding out all these things, Scientology seems to have a very bad reputation and it's seen as a cult, while everything you said, Mormonism mirrors it and it's seen as a regular, legitimate religious institution. So how does Scientology get to be a cult and Mormon is not a cult?
Better PR. I'm serious. It's better PR. Scientology has its hooks in Hollywood for sure, but Mormons, after the polygamy scandal, it was very hard for Mormons to take control of the narrative again, to make them look like family people, people that care about their kids, because the reputation at the time that Utah became a state in 1896 was polygamy left these poor women destitute in the middle of the desert with prairie madness, with a bunch of children running around. They only saw their husband when he'd come around to breed, and they were basically there to start these towns so that Utah could become a state and have enough people to populate. So it was polygamy, but it was chattel breeding, is what it was, because it was generational, forced in a certain location to populate. And so for a while, the reputation about Mormons was it created these horrible family situations of single women who were destitute, which was all true, and these men who were just philanderers who would go around and find these younger and younger and younger wives and then just keep replacing the older model with the new one. And so when the Mormons decided they needed to keep people because they were losing people, they decided to rebrand. And that rebrand went between the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s to becoming a family focused, a clean white shirt and tie where they started really looking like the CIA. I also don't think that's a coincidence. That's when that rebranding started to happen. And so that comes into the version that people know now, but that wasn't always the case. Mormons, for a long time, were actually even discriminated against. They weren't even allowed to vote for a while because of the shenanigans they were up to. So, yeah, it was a rebrand.
Wow. How did we not know all of this history? So my question is, would you say the end goal for Mormonism would be the same as Zionism?
Well, yes. So the end goal of Mormonism is Zionism. It is the destruction of the end of the world and the second coming of Christ. And in order for that to happen, there will be global wars, according to the doctrine, and rumors of war and destruction. And there will be a gathering of the Jews in Israel, which it is a Zionistic belief, and it very much parallels with Zionism.
Wow. So I, w- I would venture to say that there are Mormons who look forward to this ending and support Israel. Jews go into Israel because they believe it. So now there are videos that we see of evangelicals going to Israel trying to preach. They get spit on, they get attacked. Mormons, do they face the same type of treatment from Jews in Israel when they go, or is it or are they treated completely different?
I don't know. However, I will say that Brigham Young University, BYU, has an institution, a learning center in Israel. So I know that there's been cooperation between Mormons and at least individuals who are Jews in Israel. So I don't know what that looks like if there's that kind of hate, but there is certainly cooperation.
So now that you brought up BYU, wanted to touch the BYU to government pipeline. Can you explain that to, like, that's a saying a lot of people have heard: BYU to government, BYU to FBI, BYU to CIA. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I think it's just like any other school. For instance, let me give you an example. When I was in law school, we had, I don't know if you're familiar with the Federalist Society, but they're kind of, the bad guys in the United States. And they would come during law school and bring us in lunches. I mean, of course, we're starving law students. They'd bring in Chipotle or whatever, and then just ask us to sit through a lecture, get to know us a little bit. And you can obviously tell they're grooming you, grooming you, grooming you. And then after you graduate, they're like, hey, remember us? We were with the Federalist Society. You want to be with us, don't you? The same thing goes with a lot of these defense contractors and also tech companies, but also the federal government loves BYU because it's already got the population. Ding, it knows it's going to probably pass the drug request or drug tests, the background checks, all of that. Not necessarily, but they probably will, given the odds that they were faithful in their religion. But also, there are already a lot of companies that are government affiliated in Utah, contractors. The big NSA building is here that listens to everybody in the United States. And a
The NSA
history.
building is in Utah.
Yes, it's with a huge data center. It is. So, and then there's a history of Mormons in government as well that even goes back to ties to Watergate, Deep Throat. Um, there's connections almost everywhere you look. And when you've been raised Mormon, you start to see patterns of the way even people behave, and you go, "Hey, wait a second!" And finding out again another federal connection to the government. So it does exist.
Um, well, what was I even going to ask? I suddenly forgot. But sorry, until I remember. Is there anything else you care to share while we're here?
Um,
Because we had a whole outline that you sent, and I
yeah,
just
no,
found
you're
it
good.
incredibly interesting.
No, you're good.
I've still been going over it, and it's learning all the things I'm learning. It is an eye opener. Let's just say it's
It is.
definitely been an eye opener.
Well, I think that,
Like, all right, what would be the manifesto for, like, what is Joseph Smith's manifesto?
well, he
And
had,
how does he differ from Brigham Young? Because
oh,
that
okay.
would be a very important part. Is to Brigham Young is not the founder, I'm assuming, right?
No, he's not the founder.
But
So
he
he was the
ended up
second prophet. Yes.
okay.
So he was the second prophet. So when Smith was shot and killed with his brother Hiram, uh, no one expected that because Smith himself had prophesied that he wasn't going to die. For a man who had prophecy, he didn't see it coming. But another reason that he was in prison, by the way, is because of the touching the little kids and stuff. There was an ex-Mormon who had printed something called the Nauvoo Expositor, and it was a newspaper at the time that was outing Joseph Smith and others for the polygamy and saying, "Hey, this man is doing bad things to little girls." And what Joseph Smith did, he was kind of the not only he was the prophet, but he was kind of the mayor of the town at the time. He commanded his day knights to go and destroy the printing press. And so they looted, destroyed the printing press. And so that mob took care of that. But that's ultimately what led to him having an issue with the government. And so they started off not having a good relationship. Then, they kept moving. And Smith not only was, again, the prophet, but he was also kind of like the dictator. He was both prophet, seer, revelator, and governor. And
That's here in New York.
no, no, no. Sorry, that's in Missouri, Illinois, and Ohio. And while
But
he's
he
in,
started out in New York.
He did start out in New York, and he was only there for I think a couple of years. I think 1832 is when they started coming west. But they had to keep upheaving and going more and more west because people would find out, and they would not want the Mormons in their town because they had little kids and girls, and the Mormons had persuaded some people to like leave their families and come with them, and for the founding of Zion, which is a Zionistic, belief. Utah was Zion. It is Zion for Mormons, and it's God's given land, even though
How did they settle on Utah? Sorry for interjecting. Why
no,
and how did they settle on Utah?
that's a good question. I believe that Young, after Joseph Smith had died, had sent out scouts, and they sent them to New Mexico area, Utah, a few other places, which again were not part of the United States at that point. So they had surveyed and I think even gone to California and were looking for a place, but eventually just decided on Utah. Um, I believe it was a strategy reason of how far people could go, but also there was a knowledge that eventually the East Coast and West Coast would need to be tied together. And eventually they were through the Union Pacific Railroad, which is in Utah. So I think that Brigham Young, when Joseph died, saw the money opportunity in owning the hub of the railroad that would cross through the entire United States. And Brigham Young, anyway, he was a Zionist. So Joseph Smith, although he was a problematic person, he did actually believe in charity. Tithing for him, it was more of a, give 10% of what you can. It wasn't mandatory. He didn't necessarily send a mob out to, shake people up. Brigham Young did. Brigham Young had people killed. His bodyguard, his personal bodyguard, had hundreds of people killed, even is rumored to have killed more people than Wyatt Earp. So,
Are you
it's
kidding me?
not kidding. Not his name was Porter Rockwell, and his name and statue is everywhere in Utah. People are like proud of this
Wait,
murderer
they're proud of him unaliving other people, killing other people for his boss, for
because it's
not
for God.
paying tithe.
Yeah, because he's protecting the prophet. Anything the prophet says is a commandment from
So
God.
that brings me to another question. Prophets in Mormonism, is there a last prophet or will they keep coming till end of times?
They'll keep coming. They'll keep coming till the end of
So there
time.
is a living prophet right now.
Yes, that's what I was mentioning earlier. That is currently a polygamist because he has a dead wife who's sealed to, and his new wife who's he's also sealed to. Yep, he's 100. He's 100 years old.
And do you have any idea? Is prophets are is it are they? Do you have any idea how prophets are chosen? Like, is it like Buddhism where reincarnation, or like how is it hereditary? Not hereditary. Sorry, is it like what's the word I'm looking for? Oh God. When a father gives a parent gives something
Right.
to their, like a mother to their, like in Judaism, if your mom's a Jew, you're automatically a Jew. If your father's a
Mhm.
Jew, you're not automatically a Jew. So is
Right.
that is how is do you have any idea how prophets in Mormonism are selected, or how God picks his prophets?
Right. It is believed that God does pick the prophets. However, I believe that it is more akin to very similar to what the Vatican does. And I believe that it's basically all of the old men that decide. No, it's not really known how they're picked, but usually you can tell by the way it's set up and how long they've been serving in the quorum of the 70 or the quorum of the 12 or the first presidency. And I think also, um, there's a good likelihood of being chosen to be the prophet or in the higher ups if you've been the president of BYU. And I wonder sometimes if that's because you start knowing enough that you need to be rewarded for knowing what you know. Um, because there
So
are
a
connections.
prophet cannot just be a random person, lower cleaner in the church. It, like you said, it's the vertical morality, so the prophet has to come from the top.
Yes, and our current prophet is a former heart surgeon. So and previous prophets have been had very successful careers in something. There have been always prophets that, maybe came from humble backgrounds but end up in a very successful business or profession somehow.
So, what is the Mormon view on charity? Because I'm just trying to get that this is an elitist religion. Like
It
it's
is.
like Scientology on steroids.
It is. And if you look at areas even in like Arizona or in other countries, you'll see these giant Mormon buildings that cost millions and millions in neighborhoods that can't even afford water or clean water. And these, you realize that the charity is only for itself, to itself, not for the good of people.
Oh, that is very interesting. Another thing that I wanted to bring up, there are these rumors of what's the word? I don't know. My repercussions. Like anyone who leaves the Mormon Church does not like it. Just kind of like Scientology. Once you get out Scientology, they don't like that. They will come for you if you speak out. So now here you are on the podcast. Um, have you had any repercussions since you left the church? And would you care to share any information, anything about that?
Sure. I have had repercussions. I'm in an interesting situation where I've left the church but kept my name on the records. Um, I have my own personal reasons for wanting to do that, and one of them is legal. But I consider myself an ex-Mormon. But I'm the only one that's left in my family. So when someone leaves, and I'm a person that went through all the ordinances from birth. So I was blessed as a baby. At 8 years old, I was baptized and given the Holy Ghost by the laying on of hands by a priesthood holder. When I was 20, barely 20, I got my endowments out. That's the Mormon underwear that people may be familiar with, the magic underwear. Um,
No,
and
no, sorry. What is that? We
yeah,
what is that? I have never heard of that. Magic
okay.
underwear.
Yeah, magic underwear. Okay, so, and people
Wow.
might be more familiar with Mitt Romney when he ran in 2012, but they're called garments. And again, it's a high demand religion, so it controls even down to your underwear of grooming standards. But when you go through the temple, an LDS temple, which is different than churches, you go through usually when you're going on a mission right before you get married. And you have to be an adult to take out the endowments. But you go through the temple after meeting all the requirements, the 10% per month, no sex before marriage, abstaining from alcohol, tobacco, coffee, and then, 10% per month, and you can go in. And you're given a new name. My new name given to me was Lucy, which I was not supposed to ever reveal, but I just did. And you make certain oaths and covenants, and you do handshakes and tokens, which are in effect the same handshakes and tokens that a lot of fraternities have, including Masonic fraternities and other fraternities throughout the world. But they're basically handshakes to get into heaven. That's where you learn the keys and signs to get into heaven, the handshakes. And you have to
I'm
do those.
sorry. So you're saying if I get to the gates of heaven and I don't know the handshake, I'm gonna be turned back?
Correct.
But I already
But Isa, I'm an ex-Mormon and I know them. See, obviously it's a great plan. I still remember the handshakes. I can
so
get
you can spread it out. I mean, you could sell the handshakes. Let's like Catholicism is selling. Oh God, I mean, this is a business idea. Think about it. Ex Mormon. We'll talk. We'll talk.
well, we might as well
Ah.
because that's what the Mormon Church. It's a company town, looking like a religion, right? It has the media presses. It owns the news channels. It owns the paper mills. It owns the means of production. So in Utah, the consequences that I probably will face will be forever felt because you don't really get to succeed and thrive in life in Utah as an ex-Mormon. Not usually because the church runs everything. So at a certain point, I've kind of accepted that as my fate, but that's
Wait, you
okay.
still live
It's
in Utah?
I not only live in Utah, I live in Utah County, which is where BYU is located. So yeah, the most conservative area of Utah, and I'm a loud and proud ex Mormon.
That is Very, very interesting. A question I had: what is the difference between a church and a temple?
Mhm. So churches, you'll see a lot more of. They're less ornate, and it says on it, "Visitors welcome." They're not the really pretty buildings. The really pretty castle-like looking buildings, those are the temples, and those are where Mormon marriages take place, which is the sealing, which the man and the woman only, because only cis het straight relationships, uh, eternal family will be together forever between a man and a woman. And once their kids are born, because they're born in the sacred covenant, they are also included in their family tree in heaven. The other ordinance that can be done in the temple is what's called the sealing. So maybe a couple is married previously and they convert to Mormonism, but they were married outside of the temple. They can have a sealing ceremony where they're sealed in the Mormon temple. And they can include their kids and stuff too, just for that portion. And then another ordinance is baptisms for the dead, which is an ordinance where Mormons will baptize each other in proxy for people who have already died so that they can choose to accept those ordinances on the other side of the veil. So they get baptized for dead people. Now, once you've gone through and gotten your endowments, the underwear,
So sorry,
and
so I could get baptized if I were Mormon. I could get baptized for someone I've lost that I care about.
correct, correct,
Interesting.
and and that's one of the main frames of Mormonism. Maybe a point that it is unique, but it did get into trouble because some Mormons started baptizing people like the presidents of the United States, former serial killers, former Hollywood actors, and they finally started baptizing for the dead Jews who had died in the Holocaust, and they had to get an injunction against them because they were posthumously baptizing people into a different religion without the living family's consent. And so now the church, you have to be related to the people typically to be able to bring a list to do work for those dead people. So that's kind of how to bring a family member.
I forgot I muted myself. It would have to be someone that I'm related to.
Yes, I believe that's the case nowadays, or at least know well enough that you can bring their record to show. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That is very, that is very interesting. At least this is a lot that needed to be said because again, one of the reasons I bring this up is, like you said, a lot of black people, the situation we find ourselves in, law enforcement, and so I just needed to make that connection. Like, look, and then like you said, I personally, it's a completely different thing now. When I started this, I genuinely thought that a bunch of these people were doing this maliciously, and now realizing that you said from their perspective they don't think they're doing anything malicious, like they genuinely believe that they are doing something good. So that definitely that explains a lot, and it's a lot scarier than I initially thought.
Well, and the mission too, if I can explain, the mission is a tool for the higher ups of the Mormon church, but it is actually not to convert other people. Originally, it was to bring in new converts, new blood into Utah, but that originally missionary work was done by older men, like in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who already had children and wives and stuff. But what happened is after polygamy, the church started bleeding numbers because it was the children of polygamy who'd grown up knowing it wasn't healthy. And then the grandchildren of polygamy who were like, F this, I don't want to do this either. And so the church had to go into a fundamentalist kind of shell and really hone in and make things stricter, more fundamentalist. And they really focused on breeding, and the woman's place is in the home with the family. Women don't need education. They are here to breed. That is a woman's eternal purpose. And
Wait,
so they
I'm
really,
sorry, women don't need an education?
right. Yes. So I was
Interesting.
already not popular growing up because my eternal purpose as a woman born into Mormonism is to be a handmaid help to my husband and to multiply and replenish the earth with more babies.
Baby making factory who's
Yes.
submissive to, wow,
And
man.
so those are, so anything
So what
that
are,
doesn't
sorry,
go to, so go ahead.
if a woman does not get any education, is there does the church make any accommodations for unexpected loss, like the husband suddenly dies, how does she take, like, if without the education, without any knowledge, does the church step in, or is she transferred to another, like, do they think about things like this, or is it just
They do, and they have a few offers of resources, like you can get sometimes assistance from the church. I grew up in a home where we were quite poor and needed assistance from the church. And we went to what's called a bishop's storehouse where we borrowed some food items from the church during some hard times. However, my family
borrowed, as in you'd have to return it?
so yes, I mean, I say borrow because they never let you forget that you took something from them. They will hold it over your head forever. Like we got bread and I think some jam during a time when, I was growing up, and the church hounded my family for tithing from then on out. Like, remember the one time you were going through hard times, and the church was there for you. There's always some kind of um connect, or something that also is attached to whatever you do. So if you borrow from the church, you will owe them some way, and it's usually through service or guilt or shame or coercion to do something.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. You definitely opened up a lot of eyes when I do post this. Hopefully, like I said, I
Oh,
just needed.
one more
Sorry,
thing.
please.
If I could tell you about the missions really fast, because I think it's an important part.
Oh,
Is
absolutely.
Yeah.
I just was stopping this because I thought you'd that was all you had to. If you have more,
Mhm.
please, by all means.
No, so I want to tell you about so the original missions were for the older men, but the missions nowadays, they may be used for a colonialist purpose by the higher ups of the organization of the church. But really, what the missions are now, I believe, is to indoctrinate the kid into the church and give them 2 years of service where they have served for something. They have gone out and served for the church. They have given something because they pay their own way to go on a mission. The parents pay their way, they pay their way. The church doesn't pay the way for the mission.
This whole
It's
time, I thought, are you kidding me?
No, they subsidize it, but like I have a brother on a mission actually, and my mother pays $500 a month for my brother on a mission to be out there. Yeah. And she doesn't have
The
it.
richest church in the world with over
Yeah.
$1 trillion in assets is still asking it. This is
Yeah.
insane. This is
And
capitalism, man.
my mother couldn't go to my last year my brother actually I couldn't either. My mother couldn't go to her own son's wedding. I couldn't go to my own brother's wedding cuz we wouldn't pay the 10% per month. So we missed out on my brother's wedding. His own mom.
I'm sorry, you're not. So, as a guest right now, a non-Mormon black guy, I meet a brother of yours, and he's getting married. Can I make it to the wedding?
No, me either.
Interesting.
Only temple recommend holders. Yeah.
So, you're telling me that there are people who still participate and active in a church that will tell them you're getting married. This is the one of the most important days of your life, and your family members cannot be here because we deem it so. And
Yes.
people are absolutely okay with that.
Yes. And then they'll also tell you with the same smile that families can be together forever. And that's what they're working for eternity when they're actively separating families on earth right now.
Oh god damn. That is yeah, so I actually thought that was my thing. Was the more I started learning about Mormonism, is I came to believe that the missions that they were sending them, especially to Africa, had a colonial reason. I believed the whole point of it was to keep them in check, like basically, yeah, to keep them in check, to make sure we have a handle over everything that's going on. Add to the CIA aspect of it, the FBI aspect of it, and it's like, oh god. So basically, if you're black, you're fucked if the Mormon Church exists, for
I
lack of
mean,
a better word.
yeah, yeah, you are. I mean, you are. And honestly, even if you're white, it is not a good, it is not a good set of belief system. I think there are some redeeming qualities that it has, but those were taken from other religions, not created divinely.
That
So,
is that is very very. So what this is just a personal question. Where do
yeah.
you see the future of Mormonism in, like, 5 to 10 years? Like, do you see it getting stronger, or do you see it losing more people?
Yeah, that's it's an interesting question. So I've been alive in the peak of Mormonism. So the 90s would probably be the peak when the membership was at the high. Um, the problem is the church now is faced with the information era where things are so accessible. For a long time, like I said, because it's like a company town, it owned the printing presses, the libraries, the professors all went, you know what I mean? Like some way there was a Mormon adjacent connection, so it was able to suppress things for so long. Now, with the World Wide Web, even with the Mormons' giant SEO companies and investments, it can't control the information anymore. And so the truth is getting out there, which has been written from the very founding of the church. The fraud has been written about since the 1830s. And now people are starting to get to see it. And I will say this as someone who is, I wasn't necessarily a true believing, I think, member. I don't think I ever truly believed, but as someone who was brought up to know what they wanted me to think and has seen people deconstruct, it can be undone, but it takes work. So it can be undone, the indoctrination, but it takes an ego death of the
People
Mormon.
have
And
to also be willing to, because
yes.
I just saw something that has nothing to do with the Mormon church, but just a little political. Donald Trump versus Kamala, where Donald Trump came out and said, if elected, I will get rid of Department of Education. Everyone's cheering, and I'm like, wait, am I did I just witness that? And it comes down to, for lack of a better word, it's like a cult.
Mhm.
Faced with the information, people are still choosing to ignore it. Like the man said, I will get rid of Department of Education, meaning your children are not going to have any access to education. Every infrastructure that we have, we're not going to have people to maintain it because we can't teach them. And everyone was cheering. So I
Yeah.
think it's kind of the same thing. Is you have people faced with the truth, they just don't want to confront it, or because I can't remember the word for it, is where you've lied to yourself for so long that it's better to continue lying because you realize the truth is going to destroy everything that you've built your entire life on. And I don't know.
Absolutely true.
It's an interesting world we live in right now. But
Absolutely true.
damn,
Yeah.
damn. I'm shocked. I'm stunned. A lot more I did not know that you're just dropping all these gems. Thank you very much for everything today.
No
You
problem.
did definitely help to put things into perspective for us. Like I said, I made that video. I just wanted a lot of Black people, especially in the United States and globally, to know what they were up against. Like I said, in the United States, you have the Ku Klux Klan and you
Mhm.
have the Black Panther. The Ku Klux Klan has been around significantly longer. They are
Mhm.
more violent. They are a terrorist organization. And the Black Panther, who was created with almost almost 100 years after the Ku Klux Klan, were broken apart. And I'm
Mhm.
like, why is one organization so? And then when people start to realize, okay, the FBI did it. The FBI is full of Mormons,
Mhm.
Mormons who believe Mark of Cain. So you have people who genuinely believe, like, okay, you know what? I'm not trying to stop Black liberation. I am just trying to help my God defeat the devil and his people. And it's like, you have to understand what a lot of people are thinking. So for me, I thought it was a malicious thing. Like genuinely, I really thought it was a malicious thing. But now you saying that these people genuinely believe what they're doing is a good thing makes it significantly worse and a lot more dangerous.
It
But
does.
it's just, I think it's a piece of information that a lot of people need to have, and that's one of the problems we have in the world is we live in a day and age of information. So how do I people keep talking about 1980, was it 1982 or 1986, which the book, I think it's
Oh,
1986, right?
84. 84.
1984, sorry,
Mhm.
1984. Everyone keeps talking about 1984, but personally, I think Aldous Huxley, who's on the opposite end of things. I think that's more of a reality because it was uh, people were saying no, they're going to withhold information, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, and Aldous Huxley, I'm sorry, wrote a book. I can't remember the name of the book where he was saying instead of withholding information, they are going to give you so much information that you will have a hard time figuring out which one is the real information and which one is the false information. And they do that so much that it gets to the point where you hear the actual information you need to hear, you'll be like, I don't care about
Exactly.
it, because you've heard so much misinformation. That So me, I'm more on the Huxley side of things than the 1984 side of things.
Yeah,
And I think this proof of it is we have people, finding out information and just choosing, I don't want to listen to this, it doesn't matter. But
exactly.
yeah, this was definitely eye opening. Thank you very much for coming. I
No
appreciate
problem.
this. um would you care to share any social media handles, if you want any follow, if you, because I know you do share a lot on TikTok, if you want to get people to follow you to learn more about, so any information you would like to share about yourself, please go ahead.
Sure. If they want to follow me online, it's just at Reggie in Law on TikTok. That's kind of the only place I'm at. And if TikTok ends up going away, that's it. So that's where I'm at.
If TikTok goes away, it is. I mean, at this point, I don't think it is, because what, we're September now, or about to be October. September was the deadline, and it's not gone down. So they have definitely acquiesced, and Palantir and ADL now have access to TikTok. So U.S. government now runs it. But thank you very much for having you, or for coming on. We appreciate the information, and hopefully, I'm pretty sure as time goes, we'll learn more about Mormonism, and we'll get, like, today is just the surface. Hopefully, we'll get more in depth, and I look forward to hopefully inviting you over here to come on the podcast again sometime. Thank you very much, and you have a good day. Cheers.